We're very lucky to have with us back live in the studios once again, Tom Carpenter. Tom Carpenter is Executive Director of the Hanford Challenge. Prior to his current position, he worked as the Director of the Nuclear Oversight Campaign for the Government Accountability Project from 1985 to 2007. He founded the Cincinnati Alliance for Responsible Energy, helped establish and is board member of the Hanford Concerns Council, and also serves on the Hanford Advisory Board. Tom, thank you very much for coming back in and spending time with us again this morning.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So start out, tell people who don't already know, what is the Hanford Challenge?
The Hanford Challenge is a Seattle-based regional public interest group that is paying attention to what's going on at the Hanford Nuclear site. And Hanford Nuclear site is a former plutonium production site here in the state of Washington that made the plutonium for the nuclear weapons program for the United States nuclear arsenal. In fact, it made the plutonium for the bomb, the first nuclear bomb that was exploded in Trinity, New Mexico, the Trinity test, and the bomb that was used over Nagasaki, Japan in 1945 that effectively ended the war. And since that time, it also made a lot of plutonium for the Cold War, for our nuclear buildup there. As a result of making all that plutonium, it's now one of the most contaminated sites in the world, certainly in the United States. And so we're facing this huge challenge to clean up the site, to make it safe for future generations. And our organization has been established to help oversee that cleanup and put a public interest perspective into the mix. And also there's been a big need to help whistleblowers out there, people who see something going wrong, report it, and then get in trouble. So we provide legal representation for them, and we try to bring some integrity and authenticity into the program. So it's too late to be against Hanford. Hanford has already happened, but we can help guide what the future of the cleanup out there looks like, and that's what we do.
All right. Well, speaking of guiding the future of the cleanup out there, you just told me that as of yesterday, there's a new sheriff in town?
Yes, actually last week. Okay. The Department of Energy changes managers out there like many people change their underwear, which is frequently. And so we've had this flurry of managers come in and out in the last several years. Of course, it's been very disruptive to the site because there hasn't been predictable leadership. So now we have a new person, a guy named Kevin Smith, who was in the Air Force and then ran a couple of other nuclear sites. He was at Los Alamos most recently. He has not been willing to meet with me so far, and so I can't tell you what he's like other than from other people saying that he's very decisive. And has kind of a military mentality, and that could be what Hanford needs because we haven't had that for quite a while. So there has been a leadership vacuum, and so it could work well for us if somebody kind of takes command of a culture that's really floundering out there. Just for example, right before Christmas, there was a meeting at Hanford involving Department of Energy officials. The Department of Energy is the agency, the federal agency that owns the site and manages the site. And the meeting was about whether or not the contractor at Hanford, Bechtel, should get a fee or money for performing a particular function that they had done very badly. So the technical staff was arguing that they should not get their fee. And a senior manager within the Department of Energy, actually the federal project manager, was saying, no, that Bechtel will be paid. And when somebody disagreed, he lost his temper and literally assaulted this other employee and, grabbed her by the shoulders, shook her a little bit, and she filed a police report. So now that's gone public. It's been in the newspaper. And you have to wonder, wow, what the heck is really going on out there? They've been criticized for their safety culture. For over a year now, it's been documented by the Department of Energy that people are afraid to raise concerns, and now you know why. This is what it's like to work there. This is, again, there's a lot to do for a new manager willing to take this on and tackle that. There's also more whistleblowers coming forward and people resigning because their technical and safety concerns simply aren't being addressed. And they get harassed and they feel singled out and their career ends and they leave. So Hanford still has this attitude of what it says: we don't tolerate any harassment. We have we believe in a safety culture, and then they do nothing about it when it actually happens in front of their noses. So it's a slogan, but it's not behavior.
Was that particular bonus that they were discussing, was that related to the waste treatment plant?
Sure was. Yeah, the waste treatment plant is the large, very expensive facility that's being built to treat Hanford's nuclear waste. Some of the hottest, most dirtiest nuclear waste is at Hanford is stored in these very large underground nuclear waste tanks. So there's about 200 of these tanks containing 56 million gallons of high-level nuclear waste. And just for perspective, that's about 2/3 of America's high-level nuclear waste. So there's a very large inventory there. The stuff is very hot. It's radioactive. It's physically hot. And very small quantities are lethal, right? So if you put a teacup of this in a crowded restaurant, it would kill everyone in that restaurant. They would get lethal doses within an hour. So this stuff will last for thousands of years and maybe hundreds of thousands of years in some cases for the radionuclides. And you can't do anything with it except immobilize it. So the plan is to take this waste out of the tanks, which have failed and are leaking, many of them, and mix that waste with molten glass and pour the molten glass into these big steel canisters. They cool down. So now the waste is captured in this glass matrix, and you put that glass, a cooled down glass, in these metal tubes deep under the earth. Well, we don't have a place to put it deep under the earth yet, but they're working on that. It might be another 40 or 50 years before we get there. But in the meantime, it's a good idea to mix this liquid waste with glass so it doesn't migrate into the environment. Well, this big plant, however, has been riddled with all kind of problems. So it's our fourth attempt to build this plant at Hanford. We're quite a way along. It's over 50% constructed, maybe 75% designed. However, they used a method for building this plant called fast track. So they would design some, then they'd build some without actually having invented some of the technologies they needed to have. And they just kind of assumed they could solve problems down the road and not understanding that that's not what you do with a nuclear facility, especially a one-of-a-kind process. And despite the warnings, GAO, which is Congress's investigating arm, Army Corps of Engineers, National Academy of Sciences, and other groups weighing in saying you should not use this approach. That was ignored. They were in a hurry, and they ended up building a plant that now has serious safety and design flaws that, if this plant were to open, would pose Fukushima-like consequences to the community. We're talking hydrogen explosions, nuclear criticalities, unplanned, uncontrolled. The plant is not behind a secondary containment, right? So there's nothing to stop the waste from going into the atmosphere if there were a fire or an explosion there. So not acceptable, and it's of course very ironic that you would have a plan to treat the nuclear waste, to immobilize it and keep us safe from it, and yet the very design of the plant is a threat to the community. So that's, you mentioned the waste treatment plant, and there's a lot of controversy going on about that plant right now.
And part of the current design uses what they call black cells, so that once they build this plant, if there is one of these criticalities or a problem, they can't get back in there to fix that, correct?
Right. That's one of the design flaws, actually, that they're regretting terribly right now. And actually, it's a British design. Even the Brits are now saying, boy, you guys shouldn't have used black cells. But they designed it. It was British Nuclear Fuels came in and gave us this design. And it's just imagine a huge room where you have tanks and piping and processes going on, but once you seal it up, there's no windows and there's no doors, there's no lights. In fact, it's all packed in so tightly that you couldn't even move back there. There's no equipment that can get into there once it's closed up. And the reason for that is this stuff is so radioactive that once you start the process, it's just too radioactive to go in there. So no one will enter that room, for a long, long time after it goes hot. Well, the problem with that is they plan to operate the plant for 40 years. So engineers say, what? 40 years without maintenance, inspection, without even knowing what's going on in there? You can't fix anything if it breaks? And so people have long wondered, well, what if something breaks? Well, actually, we know the answer to that, because in England, where they had black cells, at a place called the Thorpe facility, there was a black cell pipe rupture. They didn't even know it had ruptured. It spilled 50,000 gallons of nuclear waste onto the floor. And finally, like 4 months into it, someone noticed. And the price tag for cleaning that up has been estimated to be $20 billion. Obviously not a happy situation to be in. They've closed down that facility, hasn't reopened. It never will reopen. And that estimate of 20 billion, they have this little tendency to always rise, double, triple, and all that. So they're quite a ways away from actually being able to remediate that situation. But it also takes the plant offline, and there's only so much money, right, that you can spend on this stuff. And speaking of money, we've spent a lot so far in building this waste treatment plant at Hanford. So the cost has gone from $4.6 billion estimate to now $13.4 billion. That's the new estimate released by a government report yesterday. And they're saying, well, we're not going to make that target either. And it's not going to open on time again. It was supposed to open last year, 2 years ago now, 2011. Now the new estimate was 2019. They're saying, no, we're not going to make that either. So we don't know when this plant might open, or how much it will cost, or how much waste it's able to actually treat at the Hanford site. So we're in a bad situation right now at Hanford.
All right, and yet my understanding is Governor Gregoire and Secretary of Energy Chu announced just recently that they're ramping things up there at the
they put out a happy paper. We call them happy papers. It's like end of year self pat on the back papers, where they said, yeah, we've pretty much got it handled now. We can ramp up construction again. It's all good. And the Secretary Chu, he's announced he's leaving. He hasn't left yet, so he's still the current secretary. But unfortunately, his parade got rained on because the director of engineering for the waste treatment plant, a gentleman named Gary Brunson, issued a memo in late December, which we just got our hands on at Hanford Challenge and released to the media 2 days ago. But that memo is a recommendation to the Secretary of Energy to not resume work, to stop all work at the plant, because the work at the plant is quality indeterminate. Now, this is beyond the design issue, right? They've got all these design issues that even if it worked as you built it, as you've designed it to work, it would be a menace. It would be a health risk and a risk of explosion and all that. He's raising kind of another concern, which is the quality of the work out there, the quality of the components basically don't have pedigrees. So he uses the term quality indeterminate and has lots and lots of examples that all lead to the same conclusion, which is, under the law, you have to stop work at the plant and do an extent of condition investigation that should be done independently of, obviously, the contractor who has done the work, so they don't give themselves an A+ on everything. You get an honest answer. And if that company can't show that they can back up every piece of equipment with a quality assurance pedigree, that it's been inspected, that the metals were quality, that this plant will operate in fires and all circumstances that could happen in a nuclear facility, then really you're going to have a problem opening this plant at all. So for the director of engineering to come out so strongly in a very clearly worded memo was alarming. And it came out the day after Secretary Chu's and Governor Gregoire's, happy talk memo, saying it was a 2-page memo from them, no details. But even that memo said we probably won't be able to use parts of the plant. So there's again more indications that the facility is in deep trouble. There is a lot of concern that Congress is going to get fed up and pull the plug on the whole enterprise and say no more, and we'll have to go back to the drawing board. Well, we've spent, I guess, $7 or $8 billion so far on this facility, and of course nobody wants that to happen, and nobody wants to take a risk of running an unsafe facility. So it has to be effective and it has to be safe, or you don't run it. So that's kind of the scene where we are at Hanford right now, and whistleblowers and people who don't want to be whistleblowers. I mean, Gary Brunson is not a whistleblower per se, right? All he did was write a memo. His memo got leaked, but he's certainly clearly upset with the state of things. He's not the only one. I've been on the show before talking about Dr. Walter Tamasitis and Donna Bushy and others who were senior managers and technical people who have risked their careers and actually sacrificed their careers by going public to talk about the concerns they have with the design of this facility. The Department of Energy is kind of listening because they've had to investigate and suspend work at parts of the plant. So, but the parade keeps marching out there. They keep going forward, hoping that they're going to recover, and other technical people who I think we should be listening to pretty closely because of their positions and their backgrounds are warning us this is not a safe facility. And
in fact, Brunson resigned just recently, didn't he?
Yeah, he issued his memo and then kind of said, I can't do anything more, I guess, and resigned in early January. And he hasn't spoken publicly, so I can't speak for him.
All right. In addition to the governors and Secretary Chu's happy memo that came out, in it they listed that they are looking at options for eliminating the pre-treatment facility at the WTP. Can you talk about that?
Right. The pre-treatment facility is the heart and soul of the facility, right? You can't just take nuclear waste from the tanks and put it into hot glass, molten hot glass, in the melters. You've got to remove chemicals that are bad for the glass, chemicals that could, cause a problem in the melters. For instance, if you've got chromium going into the hot molten glass, that can cause what's called gapping in the waste. That would allow liquids to hit the melter elements and cause a steam explosion. Undesirable event in a nuclear plant, and of course that would result possibly in a pretty serious release of radioactivity. This was one of the scenarios that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission identified in 2000 when it issued a report about the design of the waste treatment plant. You need to pre-treat the waste. You just can't put waste directly into there. The pre-treatment plant is where all the problems are, however, right? That's where they're having the problems with mixing the nuclear waste. And if you don't mix it sufficiently, plutonium can settle out. It can create hydrogen gases that build up in the headspace of the tanks, and hydrogen has a very low explosion point. And we saw what it looks like in Japan in March 2011 when there were 2 hydrogen explosions at the Fukushima Daiichi reactor in the spent fuel area. And it breached the facility, and radiation went everywhere, and it's still going everywhere. So we still have an ongoing accident that doesn't get much attention anymore, but it's kind of boring. It's still still pumping out radiation into the environment. It'll take another 5 years for it to be cool enough to even get near enough to the cores to find out what's going on, right? It took until 2002 for the 3 Mile Island engineers to be able to get a camera down in the core, and yes, indeed, it had melted, right? So it took a long time, to get to that point. and that will be the way with Fukushima too. And Hanford, we just can't go there, right? We cannot allow a nuclear accident or release. It has to be done right. So this waste treatment plant is something that needs new management, clearly.
So that pre-treatment plan has been part of the plan all along, and then all of a sudden for them to just suddenly shift things and go, oh, it looks like we might not need that part.
It's
Where's that
fantasy
coming
too.
from?
I mean, what's the plan then, right? You just don't say we're going to do that without putting out some actual detail about that.
Right.
Congress has to authorize that work. We has to have a budget for it. We have to have a design. None of that's in place.
Yeah, because again, they say in their memo that they've, based on the advice of these experts, number of leading scientific experts, but they don't name the experts. They don't reference any documents. There's nothing there.
Right. Well, Secretary Chu came in last summer and said, well, I'm going to look at this personally. I'm a scientist. And then he put together these secret teams that there's been no transparency. No one's been allowed to see their work. It's all happened behind closed doors. And so there's no opportunity for comment. And so now we're just supposed to trust the same agency that screwed it up, for many years at Hanford, to simply come up with some secret answer and be assured. And it's just not going to work. They don't learn any lessons out there, it seems, because you can't do the public's business that way. And there's a lot of complaints about that. It's like, wow, really? You've got some secret plan to save the world, and now you're leaving, right? So it's like not very convincing. We need a new kind of way of doing business at Hanford that doesn't look like the old ways. And let's see it, right? Let's see the public process. Let's have a little input. Let's have some transparency. And that's an element that's sorely lacking at Hanford.
So at the state level, supposedly the entity that's going to bat for us as citizens, would that be the Department of Ecology?
Yes, Department of Ecology has the responsibility to enforce both state and federal environmental laws. And the federal law that they're enforcing out there is called the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. Really, it's the Hazardous Waste Act. So anything to do with hazardous waste, they implement that law out there. So that's their job, and they've got some 50, 60 full-time employees, maybe 70 full-time employees at the Hanford site whose job it is to oversee and enforce that law.
Do you anticipate any changes now that we have a new governor in?
I hope so. We need some changes. The Department of Ecology has been very disappointing to us and to the rest of the community. Recently, it finally issued a draft site-wide hazardous waste permit at Hanford. And these are required. You have to have a permit, to operate. And they set forth the conditions for operations at any facility. Well, at Hanford, it's no different. And the new permit is 8 years overdue, 9 years overdue at this point. Finally, they issued a draft last summer for public comment, and we were stunned. I mean, our organization, we looked at this. It was incomplete. It was insufficient in every way. We felt it was illegal, and we weren't the only ones. Everyone kind of piled on with comments, and we heard that even the Environmental Protection Agency, which delegates its authority to regulate Hanford to the state, was very unhappy with this permit. As a result, the Department of Ecology just this past week withdrew the permit and said, yeah, we're going to have to fix it and reissue it. Well, what? That's another how many years before it gets issued? No, there's no other word for it but incompetence. And we can't stand to have incompetence at a site like this, the most contaminated, most complicated nuclear cleanup in the country and one of the top in the world. And we can't even get a permit issued. So that's just one example of where I'm hoping the new governor, Governor Inslee, will come in with a new approach and a new ethic and say, we got to do better. And I'm just very disappointed that Christine Gregoire kind of left things in this state, the state of affairs at the Hanford site. I think she did not do our community a service by kind of taking a laissez-faire attitude about Hanford oversight, which she did. She put all her money into the waste treatment plant. and let everything else slide. That's my perspective. Not acceptable.
And as you mentioned at the beginning, there's 56 million gallons of highly toxic radioactive waste out there, but there's 1 million that have leaked out. So there used to be 57 million.
Right. And, you know, it's really unhappily just the beginning, because there's a massive amount of nuclear waste mixed with chemicals buried at the Hanford site in open trenches, right? Not even in barrels. It was just dumped straight to the soil. And the Department of Ecology actually issued a paper some years ago estimating that the amount of contaminated liquids dumped to the soil at Hanford was 1.7 trillion gallons. Well, you know, the human mind really can't get its head around that, but people who live in Seattle, that's about 2.5 Lake Washingtons. That is several months' flow of the Columbia River. It's just a staggering amount of waste. And of course, you know, some of it, a lot of it was just water, but it was carrying contaminants with it. So now they use the soil at Hanford as a disposal medium, essentially, right? And it'd be okay if it stayed where it was, but it doesn't. It blows around. It goes down to the water table. It forms plumes. And DOE's own reports say, look, if even with the cleanup that we're planning to do, which is going to cost well over $100 billion and take decades, even if we accomplish that, we're going to recontaminate the shore of the river with plutonium at hundreds of times allowable levels in about 500 years as these plumes start to arrive at the river shore. No plan really to be able to intercept that those plumes. We're in trouble if we don't have a new plan for cleaning up Hanford.
And I believe it was on your site that just this week that is it Tank 102?
Yes, AY 102.
Is they found another leak?
Yep, that's new since I was last on the show. So they've got both single shell and double shell tanks at Hanford. There's 29, I think, double shell tanks. They're the newer tanks, and they were built in the 1980s. And one of them is tank AY-102. The military likes to put numbers and letters on things, and no different here. So this tank was actually going to feed the waste treatment plant, right? So it was an important tank, and it's a tank within a tank, right? So that's why they call it a double shell tank, and they're supposed to last pretty much forever. So they've been moving waste from tanks that have leaked, the single shell tanks, into the double shell tanks, and they've only got so much room. Well, in August, they discovered that tank had developed a leak, and they didn't announce it. So we did them the favor of announcing it to the public, and they said, well, we're not sure. We have to investigate this. And then about a month later, they said, yeah, it is kind of leaking, but not much. Well, since then, there's been evidence of new leakage from that tank, and it's not in the environment, which is the good news. It's in the annulus between the two shells, but a leak is a leak. And so they've got to do something about this failed tank, meaning they're probably going to have to pump it and put that waste into other tanks that are known to have integrity. But you can only do that so many times. So that's led to Hanford Challenge and others calling for new tanks to be built out there, which pains us to do because we don't want to see that. But you know, all the tanks are beyond their design life, and we're counting on those tanks to contain the waste, and it doesn't look like the waste treatment plant is going to be operating anytime soon. So we have to do something to protect the environment.
Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us again.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's always a pleasure.